Russian army retreats. Ukrainian counterattack successful. Hello, the Pioneer viewers. As you know, our agenda is the Russia-Ukraine war. While a war is going on the front line, its important developments are taking place. The latest developments shows that the Ukrainian army seems to have started to achieve the goal of it has been striving for a long time. The Russian army, unable to resist the Ukrainian army, has been forced to retreat. In a state of war, military units needs to be constantly reinforced. War is a process, and this process has important breaking moments. For the Russian army, these breaking moments has happened many times. In the face of the Ukrainian army's strategic counterattacks, the Russian army's combat discipline often broke down. As a result of the Ukrainian counterattacks, many Russian ammunition depots were destroyed. Many Russian ships and aircraft were wrecked. The heavy losses suffered by the Russian army are also reduced its resilience in the war. The Ukrainian army's response to the Russian invasion attempt was exactly as planned. It is well known that the Russian army is larger in size than the Ukrainian army. For this reason, the Ukrainian army tried to gain an advantage by making strategic moves. The top commanders of the Ukrainian army made incredible plans using a combination of the intelligence and courage. As a result of the success of these plans and the increased motivation of the Ukrainian army, the war has been prolonged until today. Sustaining a war is as important as starting it. The Ukrainian army has accomplished a great deal in a very short period of time, creating a strong army and resistance. The Russian army did not expect to face such a strong resistance. Surprised by the resistance of the Ukrainian army, all the war plans of the Russian army were turned upside down. The developments of the past days surprised everyone. The Russian army withdrew from one more region. Now, if you're ready, let's examine the latest developments together. As the Pioneer, we continue to convey the Russia-Ukraine war to you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. I also read all your comments on our videos. Please continue to share your ideas about our content in the comments with us in the comments. Let's start if you're ready. The Pioneer reports. Recently, the Ukrainian army organized a missile attack on the headquarters of the Russian military group. After this news, interesting developments took place in the region. Russian troops have started to withdraw from a key position in the partially occupied southern Kherson region. According to the statement made by the Russian Defense Ministry, Russian troops in the region will be transferred to more advantageous positions. Russian troops in the east of the Russian-occupied left bank of the Kherson Oblast are expected to be reinforced. It attracted great attention that the Russian army moved troops from the front lines to more backward areas. In the region, which has been frequently targeted by the Ukrainian army in recent days, the Ukrainian army continued to advance in the face of the withdrawal of the Russian troops. The Ukrainian army, which carried out extensive operations in the region, carried out a careful cleaning against the possibility of ambush and sabotage. Advancing to the positions where the Russian army withdrew, the Ukrainian army is working to increase its power in the region. The Ukrainian offensive in the past days was effective in the retreat of the Russian army. The advance of the Russian army in the Kherson region occupied by the Russian army was stopped by the Ukrainian defense. Unable to make progress against the Ukrainian defense, the Russian army took a defensive position in the region. The Ukrainian attack, which took place while the Russian army was in the defensive position, disturbed the entire system of the Russian army. As a result of the attack on the Russian headquarters in the region by the Ukrainian army, 3 senior Russian officers were neutralized. The destruction of the officers leading the Russian forces in the region as a result of the attack is shown as the most effective reason for the withdrawal of the Russian troops. According to the information obtained by local sources, tactical missile systems were destroyed in the attack organized by the Ukrainian army. The destructive effect of the tactical missile system caused a large-scale damage to the Russian headquarters. The Russian officers killed in the attack were commanding the forces in the region. It was observed that the Russian troops who lost their commanders acted with great fear and anxiety. This process extended to the withdrawal of the Russian troops. Russian officials stated that the Russian troops withdrawn from the region will be utilized in the other areas. According to the Russian officials, the Russian troops withdrawn from the region will be regrouped and used for attacks in other directions. The withdrawal of the Russian army in Kherson has also created hope for the Russian soldiers on the other fronts. Russian soldiers are showing signs of reluctance to fight, and they are very unhappy with the war. Moscow's attitude towards the war and the oppressive behavior of the top commanders in the Russian army are exhausting the Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers are struggling with many difficulties on the front line. For this reason, the retreats of the Russian army in the Kherson has caused excitement among Russian soldiers on the other fronts. While the Ukrainian army is following the retreating Russian troops, it is also fighting against Russian attacks on the fronts. The attack attempt launched by the Russian army on the other day was successfully thwarted by the Ukrainian army. Thanks to the information provided by the Ukrainian military intelligence, the Ukrainian army completed its defense preparations before the Russian army launched an attack. Later that night, the Russian army launched a series of attacks against the various targets in the Ukraine, and 31 Shahed 136 unmanned aerial vehicle took part in the attack against targets in Ukraine. In addition, 2 Kh-59 aircraft, 1 Kh-31 missile, and several types of missiles were used in the attack. The Russian military missiles were targeting the Kiev region. As soon as the Ukrainian military intelligence received the news of the attack, the Ukrainian army was immediately enforced. The Ukrainian army was on high alert and defense preparations were completed as soon as they received the news. The attack of the Russian army was prevented with a great seriousness. Ukrainian air defense destroyed 19 Russian drones and shot down missiles. A ballistic missile targeting the Kiev region was destroyed by the Ukrainian air defense system. The Russian military's offensive attempts are described by the military experts as last-ditch efforts. The Ukrainian army had managed to show significant resistance in its offensive positions. The counterattack operation launched months ago were quite surprising for the Russian army. It is known that the Ukrainian army inflicted heavy damage on the Russian army in counterattack operations. The Russian army's heavy losses in recent months and its withdrawal from a region from the first time in a long time brought some question marks to mind. There are claims that the withdrawal of the Russian army may be a harbinger of a mass withdrawal. The statements made by the Moscow officials were found unsatisfactory by some quarters. Extremist viewers that do not accept the withdrawal of the Russian army from the regions are heavily criticizing the Kremlin. The Kremlin's conduct of the war has been met with criticisms from many quarters. The Kremlin, which is also criticized by pro-war Russians, had previously been subjected to the criticisms from the anti-war Russians. The fact that the Kremlin is criticized by many segments of the society reveals that unrest in Russia. What do you think about the withdrawal of the Russian army from the key region? Do you think the Ukrainian army's counterattacks are the most important reason for the Russian army's withdrawal? How do you evaluate the Russian military's management approach during the war? Do you think that the Russian military will make a complete withdrawal? We value your opinion. Please share it with us.